I want you to imagine waking up this morning, right? You pour your coffee, you glance at the news, and you just realize that the world you fell asleep in has, well, fundamentally tilted on its axis.
Yeah, tilted is probably putting it lightly. It's more like it flipped over completely.
Exactly. I mean, the date is April 29, 2026. And you check your phone, and the headlines are all screaming variations of the exact same terrifying reality.
Right, the oil supply.
Yeah. 20% of the global oil supply has just been pinched off, like completely throttled.
It's an insane scenario, just overnight, basically.
And the entire world is collectively holding its breath, like white-knuckling its way through this fragile 60-day ceasefire that just feels like it could shatter at any second.
Which is, it's a scenario that genuinely redefines the phrase global crisis. I mean, the scale of that kind of disruption is almost difficult to wrap your head around when you first look at it.
Right. And the crazy part is, this isn't a dystopian novel. This is the geopolitical landscape we are looking at right now, based on this remarkably detailed and frankly intense briefing document we've got our hands on today.
Yeah, it's quite the read.
It really is. It chronicles the first 60 days of what the author calls Operation Epic Fury. So our mission for this deep dive is to untangle all of this. The kinetic military actions, the economic shockwaves, and some really surprising technological twists, too.
We should probably pause right here for a second, though, just to set the ground rules for today.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
Because, look, the source material we are looking at today, it comes from an author known as Barackface. And it contains some very strong, heavily politically charged strategic opinions.
Very charged.
Right. Especially regarding U.S. foreign policy, Iranian regime change, and the Middle East in general.
Right.
So we need to make it explicitly clear to you listening. We are not taking sides here.
Definitely not.
No. Nor are we endorsing the strategies or viewpoints in this document. Our job today is strictly to unpack what the author is presenting, so you can just, understand the arguments and facts laid out in front of us.
Perfectly said. We're just the messengers trying to decode this thing. And the best way I can describe the reality of this briefing drops us into is, well, comparing it to a high-stakes chess match.
Okay, I like that.
But instead of, carefully contemplating their next move, one of the players has just violently flipped the board entirely.
Yep, pieces everywhere.
Exactly. And now everyone, the superpowers, the global markets, the shipping industry, they're all trying to play a game on a floor covered in scattered pieces and live landmines. Nobody knows where to step.
That's a great way to look at it. But I'd actually take that analogy a step further.
Oh, how so?
It's not just that the board has been flipped. It's that the new game is being played in the dark. And half the pieces have changed their fundamental value overnight.
Wow. Yeah, that makes it even worse.
Right. So if we want to understand how we got to this floor covered in landmines, we really have to look at the exact moment the board went airborne, which takes us to late February 2026.
Right. Let's unpack the catalyst because, this doesn't start with some small border skirmish or a tiny proxy dispute. It starts with an absolute earthquake.
An unprecedented one, yeah.
Around February 28, U.S. and Israeli strikes launch Operation Epic Fury. They target Iranian military sites, nuclear facilities, you name it. But the target that changes everything is the leadership.
Right. The absolute core of the state.
Yeah. We are talking about the assassination of Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei.
Which is a decapitation strike of the highest possible magnitude. You have to really understand the mechanics of the Iranian state to grasp why this is so critical.
Break that down for us, because he's not just a president, right?
No, not at all. Ali Khamenei wasn't just a political figurehead. He was the supreme leader for decades. In the Iranian system, the supreme leader is the absolute center of gravity.
Like the sun, everything orbits around.
Exactly. He is the commander-in-chief, the ultimate religious authority, and the final arbiter of literally all state disputes. He is the linchpin holding the competing factions together.
You mean like the government and the military?
Right, the regular government, the regular military, and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC. He holds it all together.
So, okay, if you remove the linchpin, shouldn't the wheel just fall off?
You would think so, logically.
Right, because the author details that this strike was explicitly designed to paralyze the state's command and control. But when you read through the aftermath, the state doesn't paralyze.
No, it doesn't.
Why didn't the whole apparatus just collapse on itself the morning after the strike?
That's the fascinating part. It's because the IRGC isn't built like a traditional top-down Western military. A military that freezes when the general's taken out.
Okay, so how are they built then?
It's designed more like a hydra. Yes, the central node was destroyed, But the regional commands, the missile forces, the proxy networks, they are all designed to operate with a really high degree of autonomy.
Ah, so they expect communications to go down.
Exactly. They are built for a catastrophic communications breakdown. Plus, the political vacuum was closed almost instantly.
Right, because Mujtaba Khamenei, his son, immediately stepped in to succeed his father.
Which is a huge deal. It must have required immense internal maneuvering behind the scenes. But to the outside world, they projected total continuity.
And they projected it violently. They immediately retaliated by firing just massive waves of missiles and drones at Israel, U.S. bases, and Gulf allies.
A massive kinetic response, yeah.
And here's where I really need you to break down the military math for me. Because the author notes that after about 6 to 8 weeks of intense kinetic fighting, the outcome is effectively a stalemate.
Yes, a tactical stalemate.
But how is that even possible? I mean, the text explicitly states that U.S. and Israeli strikes annihilated Iran's conventional navy.
Annihilated is the right word.
They sank roughly 17 Iranian vessels in a matter of days. To me, that sounds like a decisive, crushing victory. How does that lead to a stalemate?
Well, in a traditional force-on-force naval engagement, like something out of World War II, losing 17 major surface ships in a few days is a devastating war-ending blow.
Right, it's game over.
Exactly.
Yeah.
U.S. air superiority essentially cleared the board of Iran's large conventional naval assets.
Right.
But this is where the definition of modern warfare fundamentally shifts.
How so?
The IRGC knew they could never, ever win a symmetric war against American aircraft carriers and destroyers.
Wow.
It's just not possible.
Because the tech gap is too big.
Exactly. So they simply didn't try to.
Wait, you mean they treated their own conventional navy as, like, expendable?
Essentially, yes. I mean, the conventional ships are visible, prestigious assets, sure. But the actual power projection of the IRGC relies entirely on asymmetric warfare.
Okay, asymmetric meaning what in this context?
Well, you sink a frigate, right? That's a big headline. But you haven't touched their swarms of fast attack boats.
Ah, the speedboats.
Right. These are small, highly maneuverable, heavily armed speedboats, often constructed from fiberglass.
Fiberglass.
Yeah, which makes them incredibly difficult to track on conventional radar. They hide in coastal inlets, they blend in with commercial fishing traffic, and they operate in massive swarms.
Man, I was trying to visualize this when I read it.
Yeah.
It's basically like realizing you brought a giant broadsword to a fight, but your enemy is a swarm of angry hornets.
That's a perfect analogy.
You can swing the sword and chop a few of the big ones in half, but the swarm is still going to overwhelm you, sting you, and force you to retreat.
Exactly. They just overwhelm the defenses.
So having a massive multi-billion-dollar navy isn't even the flex it used to be, is it? If the enemy simply refuses to play by the rules of big ship warfare.
It's really not. The asymmetry of cost and target acquisition is the real story here. I mean, think about a U.S. destroyer.
Okay.
It has incredibly sophisticated radar, right? Designed to track incoming supersonic missiles or giant enemy warships out in the open ocean.
Very expensive tech.
Right. But when that radar is looking at the coastal waters of the Persian Gulf, which is shallow and full of islands, it creates what we call radar clutter.
So the radar gets confused.
Essentially, yeah. It struggles to differentiate between a local fisherman and a fiberglass speedboat packed with explosive barreling toward it at 50 knots.
That is terrifying.
It is. And honestly, decapitating the leadership actually supercharged this asymmetric response.
Oh, because Mujtaba Khamenei has to prove he's actually in charge now?
Precisely. You have a brand new leader stepping into the shoes of an absolute autocrat. His father's removal sent shockwaves of panic through the regime.
He can't look weak.
He absolutely cannot afford to look weak to his own hardliners, let alone to his adversaries like the U.S. and Israel.
Right.
Since his conventional military was just vaporized, he had to use the one geographic advantage he possesses to force that stalemate.
And that geographic advantage is water, specifically the Strait of Hormuz.
Yes, the ultimate choke point.
Because while the missile strikes, they dominate the news cycle, this scenario makes it intensely clear that the real war is happening in the water, the war that breaks the back of the global economy.
It really is the main event, economically speaking. Let's establish the timeline on the water first.
Sure.
So a ceasefire is brokered by Pakistan, and it takes effect on April 8th.
Okay.
Initially, it's just a 2-week pause, but President Trump unilaterally extends it indefinitely while waiting for Iran to offer acceptable concessions.
But ceasefire is a highly deceptive word here, isn't it?
Highly deceptive. The missiles stopped flying, yes, but the economic warfare escalated into what the text calls a dual blockade.
Right. Both sides basically wrapping their hands around each other's throats.
Exactly.
The U.S. starts physically blockading Iranian ports around mid-April. The author mentions the U.S. actually capturing an Iranian-flagged ship, the Tuska.
A major escalation.
Yeah. So the U.S. is using its big ship dominance to cut off Iran's lifeline. But Iran's countermove is what literally paralyzes the planet. They restrict the Strait of Hormuz.
To understand how devastating this is, we really have to look at the physical mechanics of the strait itself.
Okay, lay it out for us.
It is one of the most critical maritime choke points on Earth. At its narrowest, the physical distance between Iran and Oman is about 21 miles.
21 miles doesn't sound too bad.
It doesn't, but here's the catch. The actual deep water shipping lanes, the only paths deep enough for those massive supertankers to safely traverse, are only 2 miles wide in either direction.
Wow. 2 miles. That is nothing.
It's incredibly narrow.
I mean, a pilot making a slight navigational error could practically beach a supertanker.
It's a needle's eye, and Iran controlled the entire northern coastline of that needle.
So they have total leverage.
Total. They began charging extortionate tolls, over $1 million per vessel just to pass.
Insane.
And they dictated that only ships from friendly nations like China or India or Pakistan were allowed through.
But the true paralyzing agent wasn't the tolls or the political decrees, was it?
No, it wasn't. It was the introduction of sea mines.
Yes. This is the part that completely rewired how I think about global economics.
It changes everything.
Because the text mentions that around April 7th, Iran actually announced to the world, hey, the strait is completely open.
Right. They put out a statement.
But nobody moved. Commercial traffic stayed at near zero.
Yeah.
And it wasn't because there was some giant wall of warships blocking them.
No.
It was because of the mines and this invisible wall of war risk insurance. Walk me through this.
I'd love to.
Because the idea that actuaries sitting in London are enforcing a naval blockade just as effectively as the U.S. Navy is, well, it's fascinating.
It is the ultimate manifestation of financial deterrence. You see, maritime shipping operates on exceptionally tight margins, and every single vessel must be insured.
Obviously.
You have standard hull insurance for everyday stuff, but when you enter a recognized conflict zone, you are absolutely required to purchase war risk insurance.
Okay. And who sets those prices?
The rates for this are determined by groups like the Lloyd's Joint War Committee in London. They calculate the actual mathematical probability of a ship being attacked or sunk.
So how does the math actually break down for these companies in a situation like this?
Well, in peacetime, war risk premiums might be just a tiny fraction of a percent of the ship's total value. Barely noticeable.
All right.
But when sea mines are confirmed in a 2-mile-wide choke point, those premiums skyrocket. We are talking about premiums jumping to 5% or even 10% of the hull's value for a single transit.
10%?
Yes. So if you have a supertanker valued at $130 million and it's carrying $150 million worth of oil, a single trip through the strait could cost $10 million or more just in insurance premiums.
Oh, my God.
The shipping companies look at that math and realize the financial risk is completely untenable. It wipes out any profit.
I was trying to come up with an analogy for this, and it's basically like trying to get a mortgage on a house that is actively on fire.
That's brilliant, yes.
The bank isn't necessarily guaranteeing that the house will burn entirely to the ground before you move in, but the mathematical risk makes the transaction utterly impossible.
Right.
The actuaries in London are the bank. They just say no, and the whole system just halts.
That is a highly accurate way to frame it, and the physical reality of the mines makes that risk totally undeniable.
Because they're physically in the water.
Exactly. The author cites a Pentagon estimate that even if Iran surrendered tomorrow and full de-escalation occurred, clearing those mines could take up to 6 months.
Wait, hold on. 6 months? Why?
It's a slow process.
But, I mean, can't we just send in drones or minesweepers and just blow them up in a week?
If only. Mine countermeasures, or MCM, is incredibly slow, tedious, and incredibly dangerous work.
What makes it so hard?
You are dealing with acoustic mines, magnetic mines, contact mines. You have to map the seafloor, deploy submersibles, and slowly neutralize them one by one.
Wow.
And remember, you are trying to do all of this in a 2-mile-wide channel while the IRGC's fast attack boats are still sitting right off the coast just watching you.
Okay, that paints a picture. It's like trying to defuse a bomb while someone is pointing a sniper rifle at your head.
Exactly that.
Which brings us right back to the sheer cost asymmetry of it all. The author notes that in one assessment, fewer than 10 mines were reported.
Less than 10.
Fewer than 10. I mean, they don't need a billion-dollar submarine. They just drop a handful of explosive metal spheres into the water, set up this geopolitical mafia toll booth demanding $1 million cover charge,
Right.
and the entire multi-trillion-dollar global shipping industry just parallel parks in the ocean and waits.
The leverage they get from that is absolute. And when the shipping industry parallel parks, the economic shockwave that hits the globe is historically unprecedented.
Yeah, the text gets really grim here.
The author ranks this de facto closure among the largest energy supply shocks in human history.
Oh.
We're talking about severing the artery that carries roughly 20% of global seaborne oil, alongside massive, massive volumes of liquefied natural gas.
So we're just losing 1 out of every 5 gallons of oil on the planet overnight.
Essentially, yes.
The numbers in this briefing are brutal. We see oil prices surging past $100, even $110 a barrel. U.S. gas prices spike instantly.
Immediate impact at the pump.
But I want to trace the causal chain here, because the briefing talks about the macroeconomic models pointing to stagflation and a massive global GDP hit, like a 1.5 to 3% hit.
Which is massive on a global scale.
Right. Can you walk us through the actual mechanics of how ships parallel parking in the Gulf translates to a global recession? Like, how does the supply chain physically break down?
It breaks through the physics of what we call container velocity.
Container velocity. Okay, what's that?
When the Strait of Hormuz is effectively closed and the broader region is a war zone, commercial shipping lines have to reroute their vessels. They have to go entirely around the Cape of Good Hope at the southern tip of Africa just to get between Asia and Europe.
Right, which just means the trip takes longer, right?
It takes significantly longer. It adds 2 to 3 weeks to a single transit. But it's not just the delay. It's the absorption of capacity.
What do you mean by absorption of capacity?
Well, if a ship takes 30% longer to complete its loop, that means it is tying up its cargo containers for 30% longer.
Oh, I see.
Suddenly, the ports in China and Vietnam are running out of empty shipping containers to load new electronics, car parts, and apparel into, because all the empty boxes are stuck on ships slowly circumnavigating Africa.
Ah. So it's a massive bottleneck. The goods literally cannot leave the factory floors because there are physically no boxes to put them in.
Exactly. The system just backs up. Freight rates quadruple almost overnight.
Wow.
Manufacturing in Europe and Asia begins to halt because they aren't receiving their just-in-time component deliveries.
And then you layer the energy shock on top of all of that.
Precisely. The price of oil dictates the cost of bunker fuel for these giant ships. It dictates the cost of diesel for the trucks that move the goods from the port to the stores. It dictates aviation fuel.
And the briefing highlights that non-oil commodities are severely disrupted too. Things like fertilizers, chemicals, and aluminum.
Yes. Because producing aluminum or synthetic fertilizer is incredibly energy intensive.
So when energy goes up, they can't afford to make it.
Right. When energy prices spike that hard, fertilizer plants in Europe are forced to shut down entirely because they simply can no longer operate profitably.
Let's translate this to the everyday reality for someone listening to this right now.
I think that's important.
Because this isn't just lines on a graph in a boardroom or abstract shipping routes. This is you paying double at the pump just to get to work.
Yep.
It's you walking into a grocery store and seeing empty shelves where produce should be. Because the fertilizer needed to grow, those crops couldn't be manufactured, and the shipment to carry it is parked off the coast of Africa.
Exactly. The local impact is huge.
It's watching your retirement portfolio brace for that 3% global GDP shave these models are predicting. It's a localized conflict reaching right into your wallet.
And it creates an absolute nightmare scenario for central banks. It's called stagflation.
Stagflation. That's inflation plus a stagnant economy.
Yes. Where you have skyrocketing inflation caused by these supply constraints, combined with a stagnant, slowing economy.
Which means the normal tools don't work.
Right. If the Federal Reserve tries to fight the inflation by raising interest rates, they make borrowing more expensive, which just crushes the already struggling manufacturing sector, plunging the economy into a deep recession.
But if they lower rates?
If they lower rates to stimulate the economy, they pour gasoline on the inflation fire. They are completely trapped.
So the global economy is just bleeding out, and the central banks have no bandages left.
None.
If the actuaries in London and the sea mines in the Strait are actively crashing the global economy, at what point does the pain become so unbearable that world leaders are forced to the negotiating table? Like, who is actually trying to fix this diplomatic nightmare?
There are diplomatic back channels working furiously. Pakistan has stepped in as the primary mediator here.
Pakistan. Okay.
Yes, they're trying to broker a permanent resolution to the ceasefire. But according to the document, the negotiations are entirely deadlocked
Why are they deadlocked?
because the foundational strategies of both sides are completely mutually exclusive.
Okay, let's look at Iran's proposal first. According to the scenario, Iran is pushing for a phased approach.
Right, a step-by-step thing.
They are saying, look, let's formalize the ceasefire, you lift the U.S. naval blockade on our ports, and we will reopen the Strait of Hormuz immediately. We can restore the global oil flow right now, and then later we can negotiate the limits on our nuclear program.
From a strategic standpoint, Iran's objective here is regime survival and force reconstitution.
Buying time.
Exactly. They suffered catastrophic conventional losses in those first few weeks. They desperately need time to rebuild, and they need cash to pacify their own domestic population.
Right.
By offering to reopen the strait, they're essentially leveraging the pain of the global economy to secure immediate economic relief for themselves. But they do it without surrendering their ultimate trump card.
Which is their nuclear threshold status.
Exactly. They keep the nukes on the table.
It's the ultimate hostage negotiation. Basically, give us the cash, and we'll let the global economy go.
That's a very accurate way to put it.
But the U.S. position, specifically defined by President Trump's red lines in this document, flatly rejects that sequencing.
Total rejection.
Trump's position is zero tolerance. He demands an upfront, verifiable end to Iran's path to a nuclear weapon. They want the highly enriched uranium neutralized and severe limits on the proxy forces before any economic relief is granted.
Not a penny until the nukes are gone.
The briefing even notes that Trump canceled a planned envoy trip to Pakistan because Iran's concessions were deemed pathetic.
Right. The U.S. strategy relies on absolute, total economic strangulation.
Squeezing them until they pop.
The belief is that if you maintain the blockade long enough, the internal pressure within Iran will eventually break the regime, and that will force a total capitulation on the nuclear issue.
And the author of this briefing makes a very specific, highly ideological argument to justify this uncompromising stance, don't they?
They do. The author asserts that the U.S. simply cannot treat Iran like a normal, rational actor state.
See, I really want to dig into this part, because this is where the author's bias is just starkly evident.
Very much so.
The text argues that, unlike Russia or Ukraine, where, traditional deterrence and cost-benefit analysis apply, Iran operates on a quote-unquote martyrdom theology and apocalyptic visions.
That's the exact phrasing they use.
The author's thesis is that giving them economic breathing room will just fund more terrorism. It won't bring them into the fold of rational nations. But honestly, I have a massive problem with that logic based on what we just discussed.
Okay, what's your critique of that framing?
Well, if the regime's ultimate goal is survival, which the document itself acknowledges is their top priority after Khamenei's assassination, aren't they acting entirely rationally right now?
It's a fair question.
I mean, they're holding the global economy hostage with the Strait of Hormuz specifically to protect their nuclear program, because that nuclear program is the ultimate insurance policy for their survival. From their perspective, that isn't apocalyptic. It is a brutally rational, calculated maneuver. Why label them irrational just because their tactics are asymmetrical?
It is a critical contradiction within the source material itself. You are entirely correct that the regime's asymmetric response, leveraging the strait to force a global economic crisis, is a textbook example of calculated leverage.
Thank you. It just seems so obvious.
They are maximizing their limited assets to inflict maximum pain on a conventionally superior foe. It's smart. However, the author's argument really hinges on the ultimate endgame of their theology.
Meaning what, exactly? What is that endgame?
The author believes that while their short-term tactics for survival are calculated and rational, their long-term strategic goals are driven by an ideological mandate, a mandate to destroy their regional adversaries, primarily Israel, regardless of the cost to their own state.
So the author thinks they'd kamikaze the country eventually.
Right. The argument is that you cannot allow a state with that foundational theology to cross the nuclear threshold, because traditional deterrence, the concept of mutually assured destruction that worked so well in the Cold War.
Where nobody fires because everyone dies.
Exactly. That deterrence might fail if one side truly embraces martyrdom as a theological victory.
I see the logic, even if it's debatable.
Therefore, the author concludes, the U.S. absolutely must maintain the economic chokehold. They are betting that the regime will fracture from within before the global economy breaks under the strain of the blockade
So it's literally a terrifying game of chicken.
on a global scale.
The U.S. is betting the Iranian regime will explode from domestic pressure before the Western economies collapse into a stagflation depression, which forces us to look at where that internal pressure is actually building.
We have to look at the domestic situation, yes.
We have to go from the geopolitics of the ocean straight into the streets of Tehran, because the internal reality described in this document is incredibly grim.
It's horrifying.
Even before the decapitation strike, we're talking from December 2025 through February 2026, the author details massive, widespread protests sparked by total economic collapse.
Right, the economy was already failing.
And these weren't just, localized student protests in a square. The briefing specifies that these culminated in nationwide bazaar strikes. Can you explain the historical weight of that?
It's a profound shift.
Because shutting down the bazaars isn't just a minor economic hiccup in Iran, right?
Not at all. The bazaris, the traditional merchant class, they have historically been the economic backbone of the country and a crucial pillar of political power.
They have real influence.
Huge influence. They played a decisive role in the 1979 revolution that actually brought the current Islamic Republic to power.
Wow.
So when the bazaars strike, it signifies a profound loss of legitimacy for the regime among the very people who traditionally supported it. It is a fatal hemorrhage of economic function.
And the regime's response to this hemorrhage was horrifying. The text estimates the death toll from the crackdown was somewhere between 18,000 and 30,000 people.
Staggering numbers.
We're talking about mass arrests, lethal force in the streets, and total internet blackouts. Which brings up a technical question for me. How do you even functionally execute a nationwide internet blackout in a country of over 80 million people?
It takes a lot of infrastructure to pull that off.
Yeah.
The Iranian government has actually spent years developing what they call the National Information Network.
What is that?
It is effectively a massive intranet, entirely isolated from the global internet.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. When protests erupt, the state telecom authorities literally sever the connection nodes to the outside world. They throttle bandwidth down to zero for foreign IP addresses.
Completely blinding the populace.
Exactly. It prevents organizers from coordinating on apps like Telegram or WhatsApp. But crucially, it keeps their own internal state communications and banking networks running fine.
So the state can still talk to itself.
Yes. This allows the security apparatus, the IRGC, and the besieged paramilitary forces to move through the streets in the dark. They can utilize overwhelming violence without the risk of citizens live streaming the atrocities to the outside world.
And currently, since the April ceasefire, the document notes that the visible open revolt has been temporarily suppressed by this violence.
Right, they've pushed it back underground.
The state is even orchestrating these massive pro-government rallies to project control. They've clamped the lid down tight.
But the underlying economic drivers of the unrest have only magnified since the blockade started. The Iranian rial is practically in freefall. The U.S. blockade is totally starving the regime of vital oil revenue.
The pressure's just building.
Exactly. And this is where the author pushes their most controversial strategic recommendation. They actively advocate against settling for a negotiated freeze or accepting Iran's proposal to open the strait.
They want to push it further.
Instead, they propose utilizing the Iranian diaspora and intense covert support from the CIA and others to intentionally catalyze an internal uprising.
It sounds to me like the regime is standing on top of a massive pressure cooker.
That's a great metaphor.
They've clamped the lid down as tight as humanly possible using the besiege and the internet blackouts, relying entirely on their security apparatus. But the naval blockade and the collapsing currency keep turning up the heat on the economy underneath.
The heat is only increasing.
The author of this document is basically saying to the U.S., whatever you do, don't turn off the heat. Let the pressure cooker blow, and let's hope it destroys the regime completely.
It is a hybrid endgame scenario that really relies on the state apparatus fracturing under the immense stress. The document even speculates on a highly volatile, completely unpredictable possibility that the regular Iranian army, the Artesh, might defect.
Wait, is that realistic? I mean, the Artesh and the IRGC operate in parallel, right? Would the regular army actually turn their guns on the Revolutionary Guard?
It's the ultimate wild card. I mean,
Yeah.
the IRGC was explicitly created to protect the ideological revolution itself, while the Artesh is tasked with defending the territorial borders of the nation.
Two different missions.
Right. Historically, the Artesh has been sidelined and massively underfunded compared to the IRGC.
So there's resentment there.
Oh, lots of resentment.
Yeah.
If the economy completely disintegrates and millions of starving citizens flood the streets again, the author theorizes there's a breaking point where the Artesh leadership decides their loyalty is to the Iranian people and the nation's survival rather than the clerical regime.
Wow.
But predicting a military defection in a totalitarian state is incredibly difficult. It's a massive existential gamble by the U.S. to push the country to that specific brink.
A massive gamble indeed. Because while we all wait for this pressure cooker to either blow up the regime or cool down, the rest of the world still has to function.
Right, life goes on.
The Gulf states still need water and electricity. The remaining oil infrastructure needs to be defended from the IRGC's asymmetric hornet swarm.
The drones.
Right. And that brings us to arguably the most surprising, just totally fascinating technological twist in this entire document.
This part is wild.
While the U.S. is orchestrating naval blockades and high-level diplomacy, who is stepping in to actually protect the skies of the Middle East? Ukraine.
It is a breathtaking geopolitical pivot.
It really is. Ukraine, a nation that has spent years locked in a brutal war of attrition, literally fighting off the very same Iranian-designed Shahed drones utilized by Russia. They have rapidly evolved into the premier exporter of battle-tested drone defense technology.
They have learned the hard way.
According to the briefing, they are now exporting these systems to Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, and even protecting U.S. bases in the region.
Which is just geopolitically an incredible turn of events.
The document explicitly states that President Zelensky sent over 200 specialists to the Gulf. And the U.S. military, the most technologically advanced, heavily funded military in human history, actually deployed the Ukrainian SkyMap system at the Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia.
The Sky Fortress system.
Think about the irony there. The U.S. is buying Ukrainian tech to defend itself against Iranian drones. Why? What is wrong with American defense systems? Why do they need Ukraine's help here?
It all comes down to the brutal mathematics of modern combat, specifically the concept of cost asymmetry.
Okay, break that down for us.
Western air defense doctrine has spent the last 40 years optimizing for extremely high-end threats. Supersonic fighter jets, stealth bombers, and ballistic missiles.
Big, fast, expensive stuff.
Right. And the standard defense against that is an interceptor like the Patriot missile. But a single Patriot missile can cost upward of $4 million.
$4 million for one missile.
Okay.
And how much does an Iranian Shahed drone cost?
Around $50,000, sometimes even less.
Ouch.
Right. So if an adversary launches a swarm of 20 cheap Shahed drones at you and you fire 20 Patriot missiles to shoot them down, you have just spent $80 million to destroy maybe $1 million worth of cheap fiberglass and lawnmower engines.
That's insane. You literally go bankrupt winning the battles.
Exactly. It is mathematically unsustainable in a long war of attrition.
Yeah.
You will run out of money before they run out of drones.
So how does Ukraine solve this math problem? What are they doing differently?
They developed what is referred to as a mosaic approach. It relies on incredibly cheap ubiquitous sensors and highly cost-effective interceptors. And the foundational layer of this entire mosaic is the acoustic sensor network.
Right.
The document notes they deployed over 10,000 of these acoustic sensors in Ukraine alone.
I have to pause on these acoustic sensors because this is where the tech reality is just mind-bending to me.
It's brilliant in its simplicity.
We have spent decades, literally decades, advancing military tech. Stealth bombers, satellite-guided lasers, billions in R&D to build the most sophisticated radar systems imaginable.
Billions and billions.
And now the cutting-edge defense against a drone swarm is literally just sticking thousands of microphones on poles in the desert to listen for engines.
Pretty much.
How does a microphone outperform a multi-million-dollar radar system? That makes no sense.
Well, it's not that it outperforms radar in all scenarios, but it perfectly circumvents radar's specific blind spots.
Blind spots. Like what?
Radar works by emitting radio waves and measuring the reflection that bounces back off an object. But these attack drones fly incredibly low to the ground. They utilize the curvature of the earth and the terrain, hills, buildings, trees, to physically mask themselves from radar sweeps.
Oh, I see.
It's a concept known as hiding in the ground clutter. Furthermore, they are made of composite materials and plastics, which have a very, very small radar cross-section to begin with.
So the radar simply doesn't see them coming until they're practically right on top of the target.
Exactly. The warning time is 0. But microphones don't rely on line-of-sight reflection. They just listen.
And the drones are loud.
Extremely loud. A Shahed drone is powered by a cheap, noisy two-stroke engine. It sounds exactly like a flying moped or a lawnmower.
No.
So by distributing a vast network of highly sensitive microphones, literally thousands of just cell phone-grade acoustic sensors across the landscape, they can hear the drones coming from miles and miles away.
But wait, if you stick thousands of microphones in a populated area or even just a windy desert, aren't you just going to pick up the sound of every passing delivery truck, motorcycle, and windstorm? How do you isolate the drone from all that noise?
That is where the Ukrainian software engineering comes in. The microphones are connected to decentralized servers running advanced artificial intelligence and machine learning algorithms.
Ah, AI.
Yes. The AI is trained on massive data sets of acoustic signatures. It can instantly filter out the sound of a passing semi-truck or the wind, identify the specific acoustic frequency of a Shahed engine, and then cross-reference the timing of that sound hitting multiple microphones to triangulate the drone's exact speed, trajectory, and altitude.
That is absolute brilliance. It's incredibly low-tech hardware paired with cutting-edge software.
Exactly. And it enables the second layer of the mosaic approach, which is, well, once the acoustic network maps the incoming swarm, you still don't fire a $4 million Patriot missile.
Right, save the money.
The Ukrainian system queues up electronic warfare, or EW, jammers, from companies like Virtus. They use these to sever the drone's GPS and control links.
Just blind them electronically?
Right. And if the drone keeps coming after that, they launch low-cost, AI-driven kinetic interceptor drones, systems like the Sting or the Zirov 8, which the document notes only cost between $1,300 and $5,000.
Wow. So you are using a $1,300 interceptor to defeat a $50,000 attack drone. You've completely flipped the cost asymmetry back in your favor.
Exactly. The math works for you now.
Yeah.
The document states this Ukrainian mosaic approach can reliably intercept 70 to 87% of incoming low-tier drones.
That's a huge percentage.
It acts as an incredibly efficient sieve, preserving the expensive Patriot missiles for the real, high-end threats like ballistic missiles that the acoustic networks aren't designed to handle.
And the targets they are protecting in the Gulf with these microphones are existential. I mean, the briefing specifically mentions desalination plants alongside the oil fields.
Vital infrastructure.
If a drone swarm hits an oil field, sure, global prices spike.
Yeah.
But if a drone swarm hits a desalination plant in the Middle East, millions of people literally lose their drinking water within days. The humanitarian stakes are just off the charts.
Which highlights the immense geopolitical shift this represents for Kyiv, too. I mean, Ukraine has pivoted from being perceived primarily as an aid recipient, constantly petitioning Western capitals for weapons just to survive the winter.
Right.
And now they've become a highly sought-after, indispensable defense contractor that is actively stabilizing the critical infrastructure of the Middle East. It grants them massive diplomatic leverage and revenue streams they desperately need.
It just proves that the future of war isn't always about who has the most expensive toys, but who has the smartest, most adaptable, cheap ones.
Innovation under pressure.
Exactly. Let's kind of pull back and synthesize this entire staggering picture. Because over the course of the 60 days outlined in this Barackface scenario, the sheer density of events is overwhelming.
It's a lot to process, for sure. We have mapped out a massive cascade of crises today. We witnessed a decapitation strike eliminating a supreme leader,
Right.
which failed to collapse the state, but instead triggered an immediate pivot to asymmetric warfare by the IRGC.
We've seen the deployment of literally just a handful of cheap sea mines effectively shutting down the Strait of Hormuz, which resulted in a dual blockade that is actively crashing the global supply chain through container bottlenecks and energy shortages.
We're observing a completely deadlocked diplomatic standoff, where mediators in Pakistan are caught between Iran's desperate bid for economic relief and the U.S. strategy of maximum strangulation.
And that U.S. strategy is justified by those controversial theological arguments about regime rationality we talked about.
Exactly. And meanwhile, we have an internal human tragedy unfolding within Iran, with tens of thousands dead, internet blackouts, and an economy in freefall.
Creating a massive pressure cooker that the U.S. hopes will shatter the regime from the inside out.
And then, juxtaposed against all of this, we have the fascinating reality of Ukrainian software engineers and acoustic sensor networks defending the Persian Gulf's water supply.
It is a profound and honestly terrifying reminder of the fragility of the systems we rely on every single day. This entire deep dive highlights how deeply interconnected the modern world has become.
They're all linked.
An ideological and military clash in Tehran doesn't just stay confined to the borders of Iran.
Yep.
It immediately impacts a naval channel thousands of miles away.
Yep.
That naval closure dictates the risk algorithms of insurance actuaries sitting in a boardroom in London. Their decisions paralyze the shipping lanes, which ultimately raises the price of the fertilizer at your local grocery store and the inflation rate in your hometown.
The dominoes fall fast.
And the only thing mitigating the physical destruction of the energy grids fueling this entire chaos is a programmer in Kyiv writing AI code for an acoustic microphone. The butterfly effect of modern geopolitics isn't some abstract theory. It is a physical, measurable reality.
The interconnectedness is just undeniable.
Yeah.
And the vulnerability of those connections is exactly what state and non-state actors are learning to exploit with terrifying efficiency right now.
Which brings me to a final thought I want to leave you, the listener, with today.
Oh.
Something we've danced around a bit, but we really need to confront directly as we look at the implications of this document.
Okay, lay it on us.
We are looking at a world where a piece of software and a $1,300 interceptor can neutralize a multi-million-dollar air defense problem. We are looking at a scenario where fewer than 10 cheap, rusted sea mines can paralyze a multi-trillion-dollar global shipping industry and literally hold the world's superpowers at bay.
Right. The cost asymmetry is everything.
So I have to ask, are we entering an era where superpowers can no longer dictate terms to smaller nations simply by parking massive aircraft carriers off their coast?
It certainly seems that way.
Or rather, have we already entered an era where smaller, asymmetric actors armed with cheap drones, sea mines, and a willingness to leverage global choke points can hold the entire globe hostage on a shoestring budget? Think about what the democratization of destruction means for the next decade of our lives.
It fundamentally rewrites the entire calculus of global power projection. The barriers to entry for massive global disruption have honestly never been lower.
They really haven't. The board has been flipped, the pieces are still falling, and the rules of the game are being rewritten in real time. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the epic fury scenario.
It's been a fascinating discussion.
We promise to be here to help you make sense of where the pieces land, unpacking the mechanisms and the reality behind the headlines. We'll have more fascinating source breakdowns for you in the future. Until then, stay curious and keep your eyes open.